Imagine the excitement of these 6 skydivers. They were aiming to set 2 world records in Antarctica, the first 4-way skydive and the first tandem skydive. However, instead of celebrating their achievements, the event turned to unimaginable grief as sadly, 3 out of the 6 divers lost their lives. By the end of this video, you will find out who out of the 6 lost their lives and why. Michael Kearns, a 39-year-old computer graphics manager from Burke, Virginia, had always craved the thrill of skydiving. This thrill-seeking led him to undertake a daring jump over Antarctica, costing him and some of the others $22,000, a jump that aimed to set the record for the first 4-way skydive at the South Pole. But what began as a pursuit of a skydiving record quickly turned into a nightmare. As they suited up for the jump that cold December day, little did they know of the tragedy that would unfold. The jump plan was precise, but the harsh environment and a critical miscalculation during the free fall proved disastrous. The question of why the parachutes failed to deploy properly remains mired in investigations and theories about equipment failure. I have developed my own theory regarding the skydivers' tragic deaths, and I imagine you might have your own thoughts on the matter as well. Please feel free to comment. The expedition was organized by Adventure Network International, which had started offering tours to Antarctica in 1988. By 1997, skydiving there was still a rare feat, undertaken by only a few. In 1997, a group of 6 skydivers set off on a daring mission in Antarctica, aiming to achieve 2 skydiving world records, the first 4-way skydive and the first tandem dive over the South Pole. At the time, some believed they would be the first to skydive in Antarctica. Leading the skydiving team was Michael Kearns, the most experienced of the group, a former Air Force captain with around 750 jumps to his credit. His companions included Steve Mulholland. He was responsible for organizing the trip for Adventure Network International. His leadership role included coordinating the logistics of the trip and ensuring the team was prepared for the unique challenges of skydiving in the extreme conditions of Antarctica. He was also part of a cult of parachutists who call themselves base jumpers. The acronym stands for Buildings, Antennas, Spans, and Earth. They fling themselves off any available high place: hotels, sheer cliffs, bridges. Such jumping is considered more difficult and dangerous than skydiving because the free fall takes place in just a few seconds, requiring chutes that open instantly. Ray Miller, a family man who had previously skydived over the North Pole. Hans Rezak from Austria, a bold adventurer who enjoyed pushing boundaries. They were planning to be the first to 4-way skydive, and the other 2 were Norwegians, Trond Jacobsen and Morten Halvorsen. Both seasoned skydivers from Norway planned to make history by being the first to complete a tandem skydive at the South Pole. They also aimed to be the first to accomplish tandem skydives at both poles, having already completed one at the North Pole. This added an extra layer of excitement and challenge to the expedition. Their expertise in skydiving and their calm, methodical approach to the sport brought a level of professionalism and assurance to the group, complementing the dynamic and adventurous spirit of their fellow jumpers. The group met in Chile. Though strangers before this expedition, they bonded quickly, sharing stories about their skydiving adventures, all showing deep passion for skydiving. They had a lot of good laughs and they really got to like each other. This camaraderie was crucial in building trust and morale, elements that would be vital during their challenging jumps. They also discussed strategies and plans for setting records at the South Pole. One evening, while discussing their goals over dinner, the conversation turned to the specifics of their record-setting ambitions. It was then that the 2 Norwegian members of the team, Trond and Morten, informed the others of a little-known fact. They mentioned that a fellow Norwegian had already completed a solo jump over the South Pole back in 1992. This revelation came as a surprise to the rest of the group, particularly to those who had believed they would be the first to skydive over the South Pole. This information, though initially disappointing, did not dampen their spirits entirely. Instead, it prompted a shift in focus. They began brainstorming other unique challenges they could attempt during their jump, eventually settling on the idea of attempting the first 4-way skydive formation over the South Pole, a feat that had not yet been accomplished and would still place them in the record books. From there, they traveled to Antarctica to prepare for their jumps. They practiced their formations thoroughly, knowing the white, featureless landscape of Antarctica would offer no visual cues during their dive. Upon arrival in Antarctica, the team set up their base camp at Patriot Hills, which served as the starting point for many Antarctic expeditions due to its relatively accessible location. The camp, surrounded by the stark beauty of icy landscapes and distant mountains, provided a surreal backdrop for the team's preparations. The group spent several days at the camp. The days leading up to the jump were intense, filled with equipment checks, strategy discussions, and weather monitoring. Michael led rigorous checks of parachutes, altimeters, and other safety equipment. Steve, leveraging his experience from previous Antarctic expeditions, coordinated with local logistics staff to ensure that all arrangements were in place. Trond and Morton focused on planning their tandem jump, which required synchronized timing and flawless execution, given the complexities of a two-person dive. While waiting for the final flight, they checked each other's equipment at least 4 more times. Michael had purchased thousands of dollars worth of new gear. He had even tested his face helmet at home by sticking his head in the freezer for about 10 minutes. Within the gear that Michael and the Norwegians had that the others didn't was a tiny contraption, an automatic activation device. The acronym stands for AAD, which automatically deploys the reserve parachute at a present altitude if it detects that the skydiver has not yet deployed a parachute or is descending too quickly. This critical safety feature was especially important in high-altitude jumps or in situations where a skydiver might be incapacitated or unable to deploy the parachute manually. Steve, Ray, and Hans did not have an AAD, which can be a crucial difference in emergency situations. Each member had an altimeter, an instrument that tells a skydiver how high they are. Ray reminded everyone to be sure to break off from the 4-way formation at 4,000 feet to give each diver room to open his canopy and avoid entanglements. A skydiver tries to get the most altitude possible for a long free fall, but by 4,000 feet, he should deploy his chute. Below 2,500 feet is considered the red zone on the altimeter, signaling immediate danger and the need for the canopy to be already deployed. Fearful that any exposed body part would freeze instantly, they wore multiple layers. Michael, for example, had on 3 sets of gloves. The team used a Twin Otter aircraft for their jump, valued for its excellent performance in extreme conditions. Ideal for Antarctic expeditions, the Twin Otter can take off and land on short runways, including ice and snow. Its ability to safely open doors mid-flight was essential, allowing the skydivers to exit at high altitudes directly above their target drop zone. Just before boarding the plane, they posed for a group shot. As the twin-engine plane climbed into the clouds, Michael noticed that Steve, Ray, and Hans hadn't taken the supplementary oxygen provided as he did. As the plane ascended to 8,000 feet above the South Pole, normally, oxygen wouldn't be necessary at these altitudes, but because the base altitude in Antarctica is already 9,186 feet above sea level, they were effectively much higher. At their cruising altitude, they were over 17,000 feet above sea level where the air is thin. This high up, there's a significant risk of hypoxia, a condition that can impair judgment, vision, and the ability to perform essential tasks effectively. As they were over the landing site, the divers crouched close to each other near the rear hatch. Steve leaned out the door into the icy air. As the plane reached the drop zone, he gave a signal and yelled "cut." The plane slowed, and Ray was the first to jump out, positioning himself to capture the rest of the team on camera. Hans followed quickly, diving out of the plane, with Michael right behind him. A quick glance back confirmed that Steve jumped after Michael. At this stage, everything was going according to plan. As they plummeted at 200 miles per hour through the thin, bitterly cold air, which chilled to minus 100 degrees during their free fall, the experience was both exhilarating and intense for Michael. He kept his arms tightly at his sides, his body angled sharply downward to decrease the distance between Ray and Hans rapidly. Periodically, Michael checked his altimeter to ensure their altitude was safe. With every passing second, Michael drew closer to them. 20 feet, then 10. His altimeter confirmed they were still at a safe height. He looked back again to see Steve, only about 10 feet behind and quickly approaching. Now just 5 feet separated Michael from Ray and Hans, who were nearing each other to form the planned configuration. Only a few feet to go, and they would be close enough to attempt the record-setting formation. As they nearly touched, ready to make history, the excitement peaked. It was time to set the record. However, disoriented by the blinding sunlight reflecting off the snow and ice, Michael's altimeter flashed a critical warning: red zone. He was far too low, dangerously close to just 1,000 feet above the icy surface. Panic set in, and his mind racing thinking, "You're dead, you're dead, you're dead." Frantically, Michael waved at Ray and Hans, who were next to him in formation. "I'm breaking out of here." "Cut, cut," he shouted, signaling them to disperse. But they just stared back at him, seemingly unfazed and continuing their descent with eerie calmness. Michael quickly broke away from the group, however, his reserve chute had deployed automatically thanks to having an AAD. He was only about 600 to 700 feet above the ground, much lower than the planned deployment altitude of 3,500 feet. There was no time for a controlled landing. Reacting swiftly, he pulled in his feet and knees, bracing for impact as he crash-landed hard in the snow, which wrenched his spine. After the rough landing, he ripped off his mask and frantically scanned the horizon. He saw the Norwegians' parachutes landing safely in the distance and the plane touching down further away. But where were Steve, Ray, and Hans? Turning around about 100 yards back, he spotted a small piece of Steve's baby blue canopy protruding from a snowdrift, as if he finally realized he was in danger, but deployed his chute way too late that it only partially deployed. Nearby, two indentations in the snow shaped eerily like snow angels marked where Ray and Hans had hit the ground. They were positioned as if still skydiving, arms spread wide, but the snow around them was stained red. They had impacted with such force that they were buried at least 3 meters deep in the snow. The grim realization set in, they were gone. The tragic end to what was meant to be a record-setting adventure. Officials labeled it the second worst civilian parachuting accident in history, the first occurring in 1967 when 16 skydivers plummeted to their deaths in Lake Erie. I have created a video about this story, which can be found on the end screen or on my channel. Before we get into the findings of the investigation, just as a reminder, don't forget to subscribe to receive more true story videos. Continuing on, there were so many questions such as were they too caught up in the thrill, oblivious due to hypoxia, or just unable to react? The demanding effort required for the four-way formation might have overwhelmed them, or perhaps they were so focused on achieving physical contact that they neglected their altimeters. The thin air at such high altitudes could have accelerated their fall, disrupting their sense of timing, further compounded by the complete wait-out conditions that confused Michael and likely the others as well. A global investigation was set up involving experts from various fields, who determined that the parachutes themselves were not at fault. Instead, the focus shifted to environmental challenges and human error, particularly under the extreme conditions unique to Antarctica. This investigation identified hypoxia, or oxygen deprivation, as a critical factor. This condition was exacerbated by the high altitude and unusually thin air, which not only reduced oxygen levels but also allowed the skydivers to fall faster than they might have anticipated. This rapid descent likely contributed to not all the skydivers checking their altimeters frequently enough, leading to a delayed reaction in parachute deployment. The surviving Norwegians, Trond and Morten, along with Michael, highlighted the benefits of using supplemental oxygen, which they had insisted on using. Their preparedness contrasted sharply with their companions who chose not to use the provided oxygen and suffered more severe effects of hypoxia, impairing their ability to respond effectively. Michael, the sole survivor from the four-way jump, provided a harrowing account, noting that the thin air and rapid descent contributed to the confusion during the critical moments before the crash. His testimony underscored the importance of the automatic activation device fitted in his gear. This device likely saved his life by deploying his reserve parachute when he was unable to do so in time manually due to the altitude confusion and rapid approach to the ground. Even deploying it 1 or 2 seconds later, he most probably not have survived. The findings from the investigation led to stricter regulations for high-altitude skydives, especially in polar regions. These new guidelines mandate the use of supplemental oxygen and enhanced altitude monitoring throughout the dive. I'm not a skydiver, but I agree with the investigation's findings, but I also feel that the skydivers were intensely focused on completing their four-way formation, so close to touching hands and setting a world record that they lost track of their rapid descent. The allure of achieving this milestone likely overshadowed their awareness of the situation. Michael realized the danger when he saw that the altimeter was far into the red zone. He urgently called for the others to cut the formation and deploy their parachutes. While doing so, his AAD deployed his reserve chute, which ultimately saved his life. Steve must have realized the peril slightly sooner than Ray and Hans, as his canopy was partially seen, indicating a late deployment. Unfortunately, it deployed too late to prevent tragedy. Ray and Hans, found with their arms outstretched as if still attempting to complete the formation, died on impact. This tragic event has spurred a broader discussion within the skydiving community about the vital importance of rigorous safety measures and the need for heightened vigilance, even among the most experienced of skydivers. Reflecting on the incident, Michael expressed, "We were aware of the risks." Michael stated in a post-investigation interview, "But we never thought it would happen to us. We discussed our plans and checked our gear, but it wasn't enough. That day, our luck just ran out." Check out the video I created about the worst skydiving accident that killed 16 skydivers and find out how and why it happened. Until next time, bye for now.